Oops. Technical difficulties, hold on. There we go. All right. Well, thanks again for being here. Like Don said, Jo Daviess Conservation Foundation, or as I'm going to call it, JDCF, is a nonprofit land conservancy. We've been around for almost 30 years now, founded in 1993. And we actually just changed our mission slightly from the one that Don read off a little bit ago, but we haven't published it on the website yet. So I'll give Don a pass on that. Our mission is to preserve land for the lasting well-being. I'm sorry, I'm still trying to get it right. Preserve land and water for the lasting well-being of all people and wildlife. We primarily work in Jo Daviess County, but some of our work does push a little bit further into other areas of Northwest Illinois, as you'll see in a little bit. Over our almost 30-year history, we've protected about 7,000 acres across the county, including about 1,200 acres that we own outright and another 5,800 acres that are in private ownership but are protected with conservation easement. So I'm going to walk you through some of these places today. And to get started, I thought I would share our most popular site, which is our Horseshoe Mound Preserve. Located just outside the city of Galena on the edge of town. This preserve, which is outlined in yellow, kind of in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. This preserve was the reason why JDCF was founded in the first place. This was the early 90s. Development was much more rampant than it is today. And a group of local citizens was worried that Horseshoe Mound, as well as the adjoining property, which is now the Gateway Park Preserve, were going to be developed. So the Conservation Foundation was founded in part to try to prevent this landscape, which is kind of generally called the gateway to Galena, prevent this area from getting developed. We didn't quite get our goal way back in 93. In fact, it took us all the way to 2008 before we were able to protect the first piece of Horseshoe Mound, and then we protected another a few other pieces over the years. So today, this is what it looks like. This is the view from the top of Horseshoe Mound, looking kind of northwesterly out towards the city of Galena. It's kind of hard to tell in this photo, but way out in the distance, you can kind of see a little blip on the horizon. That is Sinsinawa Mound way off in the state of Wisconsin. And over on the left, you can see these little bluffs. Those bluffs are actually on the far side of the Mississippi River in Iowa. So you've got almost a 30-mile view from the top of the mound. And we protected it because it was slated to be developed. And rather than building a few houses up on top of the mound, we thought it made much more sense to turn it into a public site so that everybody could enjoy it. Here's a few other photos as seen from the top of the mound. This one's looking kind of southerly. You can see the Mississippi River way off in the distance. Another view of the mound. So not only is Horseshoe Mound a very scenic area, it is also included on the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory. For those of you that don't know, the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory is basically a list of all of the last remaining great natural features in the state. The Bell Bowl Prairie that Don mentioned a few minutes ago is also on this list. And Horseshoe Mound was included in the inventory for two reasons. It contains several cliff communities, which you can see in these photos, which were graded A. The inventory has a 4-point grading system, A being the best and D being the worst. And it was also included in the inventory for being an outstanding geological feature. But it didn't really start out that way. When we got the mound, it was in an extremely degraded state. Decades and decades of agricultural activity and lack of management had led to the mound basically turning into a giant weed patch. But underneath all of those weeds and amongst all of those trees was an oak savanna community that really wanted to come out. So in this photo, this is after one of our work days with the Northwest Illinois Stewardship Co-op, which is an amalgamation of several groups in the region, including Northwest Illinois Audubon Society, that are trying to band together to take care of these places. This photo was taken about a year after we started the restoration, but I'll show you a couple of before and after photos so you can kind of get a sense of the scale of this restoration. Oh, but before we do that, somebody dug up this really cool old photo. Just based on the car, we're assuming this is from the 1920s. You can see Horseshoe Mound 100 years ago was much, much more open than it was just a few years ago. You can kind of see all of the big rock outcrops poking through. And believe it or not, this stretch right here in the foreground, that's Highway 20 before it turned into the overly constructed superhighway that it is today. So here's our first set of before and after photos. On the left, you've got a bunch of Asian white mulberry, eastern red cedar, buckthorn, honeysuckle, prickly ash. And after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and money, it now looks more like this. Here's another before photo. This was on a different part of the mound, and we took this photo after we had already started clearing, but you kind of get a sense for how overgrown it was. Here it is just last summer. I think I have one more set. So this photo is taken on the very backbone of the mound at its kind of highest peak. You can't tell, but the land slopes off steeply to either side here. And here it is today. So if you haven't been to Horseshoe Mound, please check it out. You can find the address on our website. Kind of the key centerpiece, I guess you would say, of the mound is this gathering circle that we built several years ago. And what's really cool about this is these standing stones around the perimeter are aligned with the summer solstice and the winter solstice. So if you go up there on June 21st or the 20th or whatever the solstice happens to be, the sun will set exactly between these two stones, and vice versa for the sunrise as well as the winter solstice. So the other site that I wanted to show you is the Valley of Eden Bird Sanctuary. This one was donated to us about 4 years ago, and it's located about halfway between Elizabeth and Stockton. It's currently our largest preserve, about 409 acres. We're currently working to expand it. More on that later. What kind of makes this one unique is it's not especially noteworthy for its floristic quality. It was a working farm for hundreds of years, but it does have some incredible bird diversity. In particular, it's known for this little guy, the Henslow sparrow, formerly state threatened species. It was taken off the threatened species list 5 or 10 years ago. I can't remember exactly when. There is some controversy about whether it was maybe delisted prematurely. Henslow sparrows like to nest in short grass structures. They don't really care very much for the tall grass prairies, but they like brome grass. Even non-native brome grass is just fine. They like that shorter grass structure. And at the time the Henslow sparrow was delisted, there was a lot of crop ground around the state in the Conservation Reserve Program. And the Henslow sparrows were finding these fields that were planted in short grass through the Conservation Reserve Program and using that as breeding habitat. Well, for anybody that knows anything about the farm economy, if prices are bad and you're a farmer, you put your ground in CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, because it often pays better than what you can make doing farming. But if grain prices are good, you take your land out of CRP, you plant corn and soybeans. So at the time it was delisted, there was a lot of available habitat. Grain prices went up. A lot of that CRP habitat got taken out of conservation, gotten put back into production. So still some controversy there. Regardless, we were really excited because the National Audubon Society designated Valley of Eden a important bird area back in 2019, specifically for the Henslow sparrow. We've got plenty of other good critters out there. Eastern meadowlark, northern flicker, and red-headed woodpecker are some of the uncommon ones that are frequent visitors to Valley of Eden. Sedge wrens, dick thistles, and field sparrows also are fairly common out at Valley of Eden. My personal favorite, the bobolink. I've never seen more bobolinks in one place than I've seen at Valley of Eden. You can almost walk out there on a day in May, close your eyes, throw a rock, 50-50 chance you'll hit a bobolink. There's just that many of them out there. Northern harriers make their way through, especially for the migrating months. And short-eared owls will make their way out too. In fact, I think I've got a little bit of a video that will talk about our experience with the short-eared owls out there. Just give me 1 second. I can figure out how to switch from PowerPoint to video. I have to stop sharing real quick. Bear with me. All right, let's try this.
Well, today we are at the Valley of Eden Bird Sanctuary here in Jo Daviess County. We are going to hopefully get a video of some short-eared owls. They are on the endangered list. Short-eared owls actually at one point in time would have been the most predominant owl in this area before all of the prairie habitat has been converted into farm ground. Short-eared owls actually like prairies. They also do very well in marsh areas. And right now this year, I'm assuming the main reason why they're here in such numbers would be that we have plenty of food source for them right now. They'll eat voles, they'll eat shrews, small birds. In marsh situations, they'll actually eat muskrat. Dawn and dusk would be when majority of the time that you're going to catch them out. So when they're flying, they've been considered, Steve Barg said they look like a football. Some people say they look like a butterfly. They'll actually kind of almost flutter in flight. And they'll also, in my opinion, they kind of look like a bat. They actually have like a weird kind of sporadic flight pattern. The property is actually on the important birding area with the National Audubon. It's important because of the grasslands and our Henslow sparrow population that we have nesting here, and that's thought of during the summertime. But the grasslands, like we're going to hopefully see today, are utilized by the short-eared owls as well.
All right.
Well, today we are at the Valley of Eden Bird Sanctuary here in Jo Daviess.
Shout out to my dad for putting that video together. Now I've got to switch back. Sorry, the technology's fighting me again. There we go. We've also got about 10 miles of trails out there. As far as I know, it's the only place in the county that has groomed cross-country ski trails. So if you want to find an excuse to get out of your house this winter, come on out and check it out. And I think I have one more video to show that kind of illustrates one family's experience enjoying Valley of Eden, especially during the pandemic last year when people were desperate for a way to get outside.
Before COVID, we were extremely busy. Sometimes leave the house around like 7 in the morning and we wouldn't get back until like 9 at night because we were just so busy in different activities.
We were going in different directions all the time. Jay and I were at work or meetings, and the girls were at school or after school activities, and there would be days that we wouldn't see each other except for in the morning.
As a family, we like to go to different JDCF areas after COVID, just to sit at home and just not do anything really. It was really weird. Being outside just makes me feel better. It is a way that we are definitely able to connect and not just stuck at home all day. It was a Sunday. Mom was like, let's go take a drive and we'll go visit this walking area.
We needed to check out someplace new and beautiful and hike, and this was one of the first places we went to right after the COVID outbreak started, the Valley of Eden.
I knew just from the description that I'd heard that it was a great place. We had the time, so I decided that we would check it out.
Being sheltered in place for 3 months, that's a tough thing to do for anyone. And so we were very happy that our preserves were considered essential activities or essential places. So they didn't close. We saw new families who had never really known about our work. We found them discovering our preserves through our online work that we were doing, but more importantly, actually getting out onto the preserves.
I think that's kind of helped us rediscover the beauty of Jo Daviess County. The rolling hills, the prairie grass right next to farmland that's actively being used. It's just beautiful.
I've learned that there's different sites that I had no idea about. So I think it's just a good thing that there's all these places around the county that we can go to and just hike and hang out at and feel safe. This has definitely gotten us closer to nature and feeling better about our community. Our bond has really gotten stronger.
People have found refuge in our preserves. Finding a place of healing, a safe place to be with your family. It was a place of learning. And most of all, I think it was a place just to be normal. When you're out in nature, life is okay. Life's gonna be okay. We can see it. I'm happy that even in this pandemic, people were able to discover that.
An organization like JDCF, which is willing to work to preserve all of these places. It's easy to forget how blessed we are to live in a county like this. Truly value the land, valuing the opportunities you have here. There's never been a better time to support the JDCF.
It's so important to have an organization that is overseeing all of the preservation efforts. You know, there are these spots all over the county that are special. JDCF has ensured that they're saved for future generations to enjoy. We've had great family times at Valley of Eden, times that I don't think we'll ever forget.
That was actually a fundraising video from about a year ago. So if you're wondering why the tone was a little bit different, that's why. If anybody feels like donating, you can put that in the chat. Let me go back to my presentation here. Okay. Oops, I lost my spot. Okay, So for this next site, I want to take you a little bit further south to our Wapello Land and Water Reserve. This is a little bit just south of the village of Hanover. And what's interesting about this one, I should point out it's over here on the right, outlined in yellow. This site was particularly interesting because it was the first site that JDCF set out to protect for its archaeological resources. But before we get into the archaeological stuff, I did want to touch a little bit on the natural stuff. One of the reasons we did want to protect Wapello, besides the archaeological resources, was this particular stretch of the Apple River, which forms the western boundary of the preserve, is home to a few rare mussel species. Two of these, the purple wartyback and the spike, are currently state endangered. The black sand shell used to be on the state threatened list, but it has been delisted since Wapello was preserved, which is a good thing. When we bought Wapello, it was a cornfield. And we set out to restore the site to a high quality prairie restoration. I've heard from some people that they think it is one of the best prairie restorations that they've ever seen. I can't take credit for that. That all happened before my time here at JDCF. But our goals with the prairie restoration were really threefold. One, we wanted to minimize siltation into the Apple River where the rare mussel species were living. We also wanted to obviously create habitat for birds and bugs and other wildlife. And then the third, which is maybe not so obvious, is when this site was still being used as a cornfield, it was kind of a well-known treasure trove of archaeological artifacts. So people would come in and just kind of loot whatever they could find sitting on top of the bare dirt. So we don't know how many arrowheads and axe heads and pottery shards and other artifacts from the native cultures were lost from the site, but planting the prairie locks underground whatever artifacts are still remaining on the site. The insect diversity at the site is pretty incredible. We know that because we've been working with an entomologist from the Field Museum for, I don't know, the last 7 or 8 years. And over the years, Jim Louderman from the Field Museum has found over 1,000 species of insects and arachnids at the property. Several of those species that he found have never been described before to science. They're brand new species, never been discovered anywhere else. 2 of the well-known species that inhabit the site are the rattlesnake master borer moth, which is again another state threatened species. The caterpillars feed on rattlesnake master, a native prairie plant, as well as the rusty patch bumblebee, which has been in the news a lot lately. A federally endangered species that they recently found at Bell Bowl Prairie and at Wapello Land and Water Reserve. The name for the site, Wapello, refers to the former name for the village of Hanover. When Hanover was first founded, it was known as the village of Wapello. Why they changed it, I'm not sure. And of course, the name Wapello comes from Chief Wapello, who was a chief of the Meskwaki Indians during the Black Hawk War. When the Sauk and the Meskwakis were forced out of their homelands in Illinois across the Mississippi River, Chief Wapello went with them, and he was one of the group that stayed in west of the Mississippi River instead of choosing to come back to their homelands with Chief Black Hawk and fight the Black Hawk Wars. You can see on the right here, or on the left here, this is an artist's depiction of what life might have looked like at Wapello. What's really cool about this site is that archaeologists can tell that this site has been continuously inhabited for over 10,000 years, going all the way back to the early paleo cultures, through the Hopewell and late woodland cultures, all the way up through the more modern day Ho-Chunk, Sauk, and Meskwaki. This is another artist depiction of the site. I know it's kind of hard to tell, but right in the middle here that you can see kind of a low, flat topped ceremonial mound where the natives would have their ceremonies. These are just a few of the projectile points that were found at the site. The one in the middle and the one on the right are particularly interesting because they're some of the oldest projectile points known. The one on the far right, held by the young man, is a Clovis point dating all the way back to approximately 10,000 years ago. And when we were doing our archaeological survey on site, this young man reached out, picked up a clod of dirt out of the cornfield and broke it open, and out popped out this 10,000-year-old spear point. Pretty cool. So what does all this mean? We have this really, really rich cultural history. We have a very compelling story about the natural history to tell. And for years, we've been thinking about building a discovery center on the site that will tell both the natural and the cultural histories of the site. And what makes this particular project interesting is that it will be led by Indigenous peoples. And what I mean by that is very often, not always, but very often, if you were to go to the Field Museum or the Smithsonian or even the Illinois State Museum to learn about these Indigenous cultures, they are often, the exhibits that you'll see in these institutions are created by white archaeologists, which is fine. What is very rare, except on actual Indian reservations, is to see Indigenous stories told by Indigenous people. So what we hope to do through this center is to provide a space for the Indigenous peoples to tell their stories the way they want them to be told, both past, present, and future. The JDCF Board of Directors just authorized phase 1 of the Wapello Discovery Center project at their board meeting last month. So if you're a member of JDCF and you get our newsletter, you'll be learning more about this very soon. Moving a little bit further north, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but there is one really cool feature at our Keough Effigy Mounds Preserve, which is located along the Mississippi River, just a little bit southwest of Galena. And that feature is the only remaining bare effigy mound left in the state of Illinois. It's kind of hard to tell, but what you're looking at here is over on the left, you have the legs. These are the forelegs of the bear. These are the rear legs of the bear. This is its torso. And then up at the front here is the head of the bear. There were reports of several bear effigy mounds being located in Illinois in historic times. Unfortunately, all of them have been lost through Euro-American activity, development, agriculture, what have you. This was the primary reason why we sought out this preserve and bought it. We're going to stay along the Mississippi River, but we're going to move a little bit further south to Casper Bluff. Casper Bluff is probably our second most popular site, and it is bordered by the Mississippi River on the west, and it's located south of Galena by, I don't know, maybe 8 miles. Again, the main reason why we were interested in Casper Bluff was the Thunderbird effigy mound. Same sad story. This is the only remaining Thunderbird effigy mound left in the state of Illinois. All of the rest of them have been lost to Euro-American activity over the last 200 years or so. You can still find Thunderbird mounds in other parts of the world, Iowa, Wisconsin, but nowhere else in Illinois can you find this thing. At the front of the photo is its tail. You can see the two wings to either side and then the head in the rear. This photo was taken using a fisheye camera lens, so it's a little deceiving, but the wingspan from tip to tip is actually over 200 feet. So it's quite an impressive work of art. We also had a little Luss Hill Prairie remnant. This is the Mississippi River backwaters on the left. The little hill prairie was just steep enough and just close enough to the edge of the cliff where it was able to escape getting plowed up. It's not very big at all. It's very, very small, but you know what they say, less is more. Here's your joke for the night. If you weren't all on mute, I'm sure you would be laughing right now. The rest of the preserve was mostly cattle pasture, a little bit of hayfield. And this is what it looked like before we were able to do any sort of prairie restoration. Everybody loves a good before and after photo. Here's the after. And you all know what happens when you create good habitat. The pollinators come back. So we are now the proud parents of rusty-patched bumblebees at two of our sites, Wapello and Casper Bluff, which we are very excited to hear about. All right, last but not least, I just wanted to touch briefly on our newest project out at Casper Bluff, and that's the Casper Creek Natural Cemetery. This might seem a little odd to some of you. Why would JDCF want to create a cemetery? Well, we didn't originally. What we wanted to do was to find a source of revenue to support our operations. Buying and restoring and maintaining all of these areas, it isn't exactly cheap. And we really wanted to find some sort of for-profit venture to support those operations. So after a lot of due diligence, we landed on a cemetery, which was recently a certified, recently achieved conservation burial ground certification through the Green Burial Council. So what is a natural cemetery? Basically what it means is when people die and they're buried, they go into the ground all natural, no embalming, no artificial materials, no vault. People are usually buried in a plain wooden box or a wicker basket or a cloth sheet, something biodegradable. The idea is that the body is then returned to the earth more quickly than it would be in a traditional cemetery where there's embalming and metal and plastic and a concrete vault that frankly prevents you from being returned to the earth. And we decided to go one step further, which was to make it a full-blown conservation cemetery. And what that means is that instead of being buried in a lawn, turf grass, like you would see at any normal cemetery, you would be planted in a prairie. The photo you see here is from earlier this year. We have not planted the prairie yet, but we're going to be doing that in just a few weeks. So a few weeks from now, that'll all be little blue stem and butterfly milkweed and purple coneflower and all of the good native species we know. Last but not least, the property is protected with a conservation easement. And that's important because it prevents JDCF from ever trying to then convert the cemetery back to a traditional cemetery. The conservation easement means that it will stay in a prairie habitat forever. Here's just a couple other photos. You can see on the right, this is taken from a burial ceremony. This is one of my favorite sites. It's not open to the public, but it was just cool enough to merit mentioning anyways. It's another bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. Not surprisingly, a lot of our coolest resources are clustered around rivers. And the Woodford easement is this area in yellow, which is kind of buffered by a few other conservation easements that we have. The Woodford easement is unique because it has a very, very rare natural community called an algific talus slope. Those are two words that you've probably not heard before. Algific means cold air or cold producing. Talus is loose rocks. So if you've ever been at the base of a cliff, there's usually a jumble of rocks. Some people call it talus, some people call it scree, piled up at the base of the cliff. And the way these communities work is a really, really unique interplay between karst bedrock, steep slope aspect, and rare vegetation. So what you have is a subterranean airflow system that allows the algific talus slope to remain cool all year round. In the summer, warm air is drawn down through sinkholes that go straight down to a chamber full of ice that then cools the air. And then that cooled air passes out through the side of the hill through these little vents. So you can be out there on a 90-degree day, and if you put your hand down next to one of these vents, the air might be 40, 45 degrees. And the effect, of course, is that the plants that grow on these slopes are very, very tolerant of cold temperatures. And the plants that grow there can't really be found anywhere else in Illinois. In the winter, the effect is reversed. Cold air is drawn in through the side of the slope. It passes through this subterranean chamber and it's warmed, and then it passes up through these sinkholes on the top of the bluff. And if you go out there on a really cold day, like we're at 0 degrees, you can see water vapor shooting out these sinkholes as they kind of condense and come out through the holes. It's really cool looking. I was actually out there just a couple of weeks ago, and the morning I was out there, it was about 45 degrees that morning. It was probably about 70 degrees the day before. We had just had a big cold front move through. And this cave over on the left here, I put my hand into that cave, and the air coming out of that cave must have been at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit when the ambient air temperature outside was about 45 degrees. And you can tell that it's putting out all that warm, moist air because of all the green moss growing on the side of this cave. That moss wouldn't be there in that amount of abundance if it weren't for that warm moisture coming out. On the right, this is a relatively new sinkhole that just opened up. I actually discovered it by almost walking into it. I'm not sure if I would have fallen all the way to China, but I am glad I didn't have to find out. So we're going to try to get that marked off and make sure that nobody else discovers it the way I did. This is what the slopes look like down the hill, where the cold air actually passes out through the cave system. On the left, it's kind of hard to tell, but this is a little limestone shelf on the side of the bluff. There's this talus, this loose rock above and below the shelf. But again, if you put your hand here on a really cold day, or I'm sorry, on a really hot day, say 80, 85 degrees, the air coming out of there would be maybe 40, 45. This is what it looks like in the summer. Steep slope. The ground layer is almost exclusively ferns, and then the canopy is often dominated by paper birch trees. You can't tell in this photo because of all the vegetation, but underneath all of these ferns, it's just piles of loose rock that have slowly chipped and eroded off the cliff over the years and piled up at the base of the cliff. years ago, we made t-shirts that said algific slopes are cool, which is still to this day one of my favorite puns. All right, so the effect of these algific slopes is you get some very rare species. One of them is Canada violet, which is a state endangered species in Illinois. It's called Canada violet because it's usually found only in more northern climates, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Canada. Down here in Illinois, it can really only persist in cool, moist environments like algific talus slopes. Cliff goldenrod, this one isn't exactly a algific talus slope species. It really will grow on most cliff communities, but it is a state threatened species and it is found at this site. So I thought I'd throw it in here. Dwarf raspberry, another Illinois threatened species, only found in shady, moist, cool environments in a few counties around the state. Beaked hazelnut is really interesting. It looks a lot like your normal American hazelnut, except you can see the fruit here has this weird protrusion that kind of looks like a beak. And this particular property, the Woodford easement, is the only place in Illinois where beaked hazelnut has ever been discovered. Again, it only grows in cool environments. So if you go up to Minnesota, you can find it quite commonly. But in Illinois, this is the only place you can find it. We think it might have been extirpated. We haven't seen it for a few years, but we're on a mission to try to re-find it and confirm that it's still there. Bristly rose, this is another one that only grows on algific slopes. It was only known from 2 sites in the entire state of Illinois, and this was one of them. Again, we think it's been extirpated, likely due to the deer browsing it. Why the deer want to eat something with all of these little bristly thorns is beyond me. Same story with the mountain clematis, pretty common in more northern climates. In Illinois, it's only found on this site, but we think it's been extirpated, unfortunately. Last but not least, the Iowa Pleistocene snail, which is a federally endangered species. That's my palm on the left, and that little snail shell is only about the size of a pea. It's very, very small. These critters were extremely common during the Ice Age or the Pleistocene epoch. They rooted around in the leaf litter, munching on decaying plant matter. And you guessed it, as the Ice Age ended and the climate warmed, the only place these cold-loving snails can still survive are these algific talus slopes. This property is the only place in Illinois where it's found, and then there's a couple dozen sites over in Iowa where you can find it too. This is the only place in Illinois. All right, one more bluff property, and then we're getting close to the end here. I know we're running out of time. Normally I wouldn't mention this property, but it does have one thing that I just couldn't skip. This is a privately owned property protected by a conservation easement right at the confluence of the Sinsinawa River and the Mississippi River. And yes, it does have a very nice Luss Hill Prairie remnant. Yes, it does have a bunch of Indian mounds on it, but the real reason I wanted to show it to you was this thing. This is the jeweled shooting star, Dodecathion amethystinum. And since the name of this presentation was the gems of JDCF's natural lands, I had to include the only literal gem or jewel in this whole presentation. To the untrained eye, it looks very similar to the more common Midland shooting star, but this one only grows on moist wooded bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, and maybe a few other areas, but I think it's primarily known from the Mississippi River bluffs. Very beautiful, with that bright kind of magenta color. And this is the best population of this species that we know of, at least in the region, maybe the whole state. We're going to end with the Rutherford Refuge at Twin Bridges. This is JDCF's newest property. We bought it almost a year ago, about 11 months ago. And it's also our smallest property. So even though it's only 24 acres, it packs a lot of cool stuff into that small acreage. It's located near Warren, Illinois, which is in the northeastern part of Jo Daviess County, which is pretty close to the edge of the driftless area. And because it's pretty close to the edge of the driftless, it has kind of a unique assemblage of natural communities. The main reason we were interested in the property is this wet mesic prairie sedge meadow complex. As far as we know, this is the best wet mesic prairie still around in the driftless area of Illinois. We think it's the best wet mesic prairie because it's the only wet mesic prairie we know of. All of the rest of them have been plowed up or drained for farmland. So in there you can find cool species like our one of our land managers, Jake Pulfer, hiding amongst the spotted Joe Pye weed. We also have white turtlehead, a very cool wetter prairie species. The half-black bumblebee, which is it's not on the endangered or threatened list, but it is on the watch list. We found that up there. The Michigan lily, again, it's not particularly rare. I mean, it's not exactly common. This one is very similar to the Turk's cap lily with a few slight differences. I really liked this one because it was known from the site for about 20 years ago. And then it disappeared. Nobody had seen it on the site for about 20 years. And right after we bought it, we started doing some pretty intensive ecological restoration. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as we start pulling out the invasive species, the Michigan lily popped right back up. And we're hoping to get a healthy population reestablished. That seed was just waiting in the seed bank, waiting for the right conditions to sprout all these years. We also have a pretty nice barrens, oak savanna prairie community with some cool species like the Midland shooting star, pale purple coneflower, as well as some things like robin's plantain and yellow stargrass. Again, you know, not endangered, not threatened, but these are some fairly conservative species that are somewhat uncommon around the state. These are all woodland species. Again, not particularly rare, but I like them, so I wanted to include them. Poke milkweed over there on the left is a woodland milkweed. It tends to grow in areas with dappled sunlight with a mild amount of disturbance. We were pretty excited to find that one out there. The purple twayblade orchid, as well as the showy orchid. Looks like the caption kind of got cut off, but we found all of these on the site. We're pretty happy about that. So I think we're going to end the presentation. Oh, one more thing. I think many of you are familiar with the Illinois Nature Preserve system. The Illinois Nature Preserves Commission was set up to protect the rarest and best and high quality sites around the state of Illinois. And the Rutherford Refuge is on track to become JDCF's first Illinois nature preserve. We're hoping to have that wrapped up in January. So we're pretty proud to achieve such a prestigious status for this site, as well as getting some additional protection for the site. Having a property designated as an Illinois nature preserve is just about the highest level of protection you can get for a property. So I think we're going to end this with one last video, and then we can call it a night. Oops, oh, here we go. We are right here where the east branch and the west branch of Clear Creek come together. The property we're looking at is right in here. We're trying to figure out if it qualifies for land and water reserve status with Illinois Nature Preserves Commission. So we have Natural Areas Preservation Specialist Angela Morehouse up from West Central Illinois to do a plant inventory. Okay, so Jim Raichie said that the most conservative species are along the rim of the quarry.
Right,
And
which is more the dry barrens.
right, but at the same time, you know, the wet mesic prairie sedge meadow is really uncommon in the driftless.
We work side by side with a lot of our land trust partners. The land trusts often can do things more efficiently. There's less, government bureaucracy sometimes. They are oftentimes closely tied with the landowners.
JDCF is on track to purchase this property from the Rutherford estate later this year. But today it's in early August and we're out here and identifying all of the wildflowers.
Right now I'm covering 17 counties and it took me 4 hours to get up here. So if I work with a land trust that can already meet with the landowner and have things set up so I can be more efficient with my time, that really helps. But partnerships in a time when we're short-staffed is absolutely critical. We couldn't do our jobs without help from land trusts.
Well, if the property is added to the natural areas inventory, we can then upgrade its status to either Illinois Land and Water Reserve or Illinois Nature Preserve. And what that does is it grants a protective status over the property. It is less likely to become the victim of trespass or encroachment. And thanks to a new grant program, properties enrolled in those two programs are eligible for additional funding. All right, that is it. Thank you, everybody. I think we have a few questions in chat.
You want me to read them, Jim, or are you opening chat?
I can read them off.
Okay.
Don asked if I visit in the fall, is there hunting on these properties? The answer is sometimes. We have all of our closures for hunting season posted on our website. Some of our properties are closed for chronic wasting disease, abatement, trying to cull the deer population. Others are just closed for safety concerns around the two main hunting seasons. So if you want to come see these sites, please check out our website first.
Perfect.
Gary asked, how is JDCF funded? I'll give you the short answer. We do have what I would say is I'd call it a modest endowment that provides some of our funding. The majority of our funding comes through annual fundraising, individual donations, grant writing. I think our operating budget this year was just over $800,000. So it's quite a lift. On top of all of that annual fundraising we need to do just for our basic operations, all of the fundraising for land acquisition, for land restoration, that is all separate. So it's quite a lift, but we're pretty excited to be able to do this work. Gary also asked, how does JDCF decide which land is worth acquiring? That is, again, a little bit of a difficult question to answer because we're actually in the process of revising our criteria that we use to filter land acquisitions. What we found through membership surveys is that our membership places pretty equal weight on both natural features as well as archaeological features. And I think that our past acquisitions tend to reflect that. We seek out properties that just have archaeological resources. We seek out properties that have just natural resources, and we seek out properties that have both. We're just in the early stages of putting together kind of a comprehensive land acquisition plan. So we intend to be much more strategic and targeted with our land acquisitions than we have been in previous years. Last question was, will there be any archaeological digs at Wapello? Maybe. There have been several digs in the past, most recently in 2018, and there have been several scientific studies published about those digs. So if you're curious and learning more, I can certainly provide that information, probably through email.
So if you wanted to put the JDCF email or their website address in the chat for people to grab.
Absolutely.
Could it be in an email for people who don't know where chat is?
Yeah, we can include that when we're, what we're gonna do is the session tonight has been recorded, and because there was a lot of information, if you're interested in going back and reviewing a lot of that stuff, you can go ahead and watch the video again. That'll be available on the our website. But we'll send you the link to that. If you signed up for this program, we'll send you a link, and we'll also give you the email address for JDCF as well. A lot of great information, and just appreciate your time, Jim, and your work and your hard work. And I don't know if there's any other questions that people want to ask. You can unmute yourself if you have a question that you want to ask at this point.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to Audubon for the work that you do. Please come visit some of our preserves sometime if you haven't already.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jim. Very, very interesting, very, very great.